Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. One of the most important elected bodies in Texas politics is the State Board of Education. The decisions that it will make will largely shape the future that our state takes. And today we're going to break down why it's significant and why it's something that the grassroots needs to unite behind in the upcoming campaign cycle. Let's get to the show. In 2009, I was 19 years old. My dad was no longer in the legislature because he won in 2006, lost in 2008. And so I was just getting around, still very involved in politics. I was the president of the Comal County Republican Club, which was a merger between the men's club that exists that was really small and some conservatives from the TFRW club that broke off to be part of a conservative club, and was involved in that and volunteering anywhere I could find an opportunity to try to get into the fight. And one of the people that I had met when I was 16 and known for 3 years was Ken Mercer, who at the time served on the State Board of Education. And the State Board of Education became a nationally discussed legislative, or I guess rulemaking body at the time, because they set the curriculum standards for the material that is taught in our public school system. And they had decided that one of the creation theories, where did we come from? One of the theories that should be taught to children in the public schools is that the fact that we were created by God should be introduced as actually a very legitimate theory for where we came from. And the national media lost their minds. They lost their minds that in Texas, we were going to tell students that, hey, one of the theories that actually is potentially pretty likely is that we were created by a creator, which, by the way, is true. So it's probably something good to teach kids in public schools. This made the State Board of Education a highly contentious body. And as a result, some forces largely funded by Charles Butt, who runs HEB, and teacher unions teamed up and were able to elect a number of more moderate members to the State Board of Education. They got involved. Now, the thing to know about the State Board of Education, for those of you who don't know, is that it is an elected body that does several things. They approve whether or not a new charter school is allowed to be built, where parents have more options to educate their children in different ways. They set the standards for not only curriculum, but also now instructional materials, and I'll explain the difference of that in just a second. And then they also manage the permanent school fund, which is billions of dollars that ensures that the instructional materials used in our public school classroom are free, paid for by tax dollars. And so those are the things that they set and they do. There are 15 members on the State Board of Education, and those 15 members are made up of 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats. I'm actually looking up right now the amount of money in the permanent school fund. I'm pretty sure, $62 billion in the permanent school fund as of August 31st, 2024. So as you can imagine, that's a substantial amount of money to oversee. One of the important things is that you have members that want to make sure that that money is not invested in China, that that money is not invested in DEI woke companies. And instead, if the Republican states will use their dollars to actually incentivize the right behavior from corporate America, we will get a lot less leftward drift than what we are actually seeing in corporate America. So the State Board of Education is 15 members, 5 Democrats, 10 Republicans. And if I'm going to be honest, we probably have 5 consistent conservatives, 5 that are not necessarily going to be counted on every single day, and then 5 Democrats. So making sure that the right thing happens in that board is not as easy as it should be. There are more than 2 congressional districts that fit inside of a State Board of Education district. Just to give you perspective on this, in a couple of the primaries that were had last election, there were over 200,000 votes cast for the position of State Board of Education. I bet most of you who are actually very involved a lot of you are precinct chairs. Some of you are donors. Some of you are staff members for legislators. Some of you are legislators yourselves. Quite a few people don't even know who their state board of education member is that attend the Republican state convention. Okay. And this is really why we're talking about it. In 2009, I went to Ken Mercer, who served on the State Board of Education, and said, hey, this is really controversial. You're talking about the importance of creation being presented to students as a legitimate theory for where we came from, and you're going to be opposed by a guy named Tim Tuggy, who is a registered lobbyist. And so I said, how much money do you have in your campaign? And he said, nothing. And I said, okay, who's running your campaign? He said, no one. I said, well, I'll run your campaign and I'll do it for free. And if you win, I'll take a $4,000 win bonus, which for me at 19 years old meant I was going to get rich if this guy ran. And so I ran his campaign, 2 congressional districts in size. So we're driving all over the area, speaking at clubs, putting up signs, getting our push cards done, planning our email blasts to hit and to try to drive our narrative. And we ended up winning handily his reelection campaign. It was the first campaign I ever ran. And in fact, in my office, I have a framed picture of Ken Mercer's yard sign still to this day. So I have cared about the State Board of Education since 2010. I ended up running quite a few campaigns as I started my consulting company in that area. And it is an issue and board that I care deeply about. Republicans for a while got lax, and all of the sudden, the board went from having a consistent majority of people that were going to empower parents and make sure we had the right curriculum to being a board in flux, this 5-5-5. And if I'm going to name names, I would say that the 5 most consistent conservative members are the chairman, Aaron Kinsey, Brandon Hall, Audrey Young, Julie Pickren, LJ Francis. These are 5 just strong, sharp, conservative, consistent Republican members. I will give Tom Maynard credit and say that quite often he does end up on the right side of things. And then ultimately you have Evelyn Brooks and Pam Little, who probably will do everything they can to not vote with conservatives, which leaves Kevin Ellis and Will Hickman as the swing votes. And remember, to get anything done, you need 8 votes on this board. This became really important in mid-September when it came to passing the social studies framework that was being discussed. And just to give you a perspective, in fact, Kristen Bentley tweeted this out because the state board meets 5 times a year. They met, they were discussing this framework. They had a vote. The Democrats had a social studies framework that they wanted to push, and Republicans had a social studies framework that they wanted to push. And Kristen Bentley tweeted out, final vote is today. 3 Republican State Board of Education members, Pam Little, Evelyn Brooks, and Will Hickman, joined the radical Democrats to push K-8 social studies framework that replaces a year of world history that the kids are going to study to world cultures, from world history to world cultures, and then waters down American history. If you are a constituent of Pam Little, Evelyn Brooks, or Will Hickman, contact them this morning and urge them to stand with their Republican colleagues and support a pro-America, anti-woke framework for K-8 social studies. Your voice matters. Within a couple hours of her tweeting that and a bunch of grassroots conservatives engaging on this issue for a number of days, a final vote was taken to reconsider the social studies framework, and it passed. 8-7, conservatives won. Will Hickman switched his vote from voting with Pam Little, Evelyn Brooks, and the other 5 Democrats to voting with the rest of his Republican colleagues. And as you know by the math, that meant that Kevin Ellis, Tom Maynard, and the other 5, what I would call more consistent conservatives, were all voting together, but they needed Will to join them. And they did. In fact, let's just go to a clip of the vote taken here.
If you're in favor of G, you should vote yes. And if you're not, you should vote no. All those in favor, please show by raising your hand. 8, thank you. All those opposed? 7, 8-7, the motion carries.
One point I will make, the vast majority of y'all listen to this podcast, but if you were watching the podcast, the funny thing is the audio and the video actually don't match up, which I think is so funny when I watch the video of the state board. So the video's like 8 seconds behind the audio. And that just goes to show how little attention is paid to this elected body. These positions are 2 congressional districts in size. A bunch of voters don't know who their board member is, let alone who's running to be on the board. And the decisions they're going to make are pretty massive. They're going to determine not only the textbook standards, but instructional materials. This last legislative session, one of the conservative victories that we had was HB 100 by Terry Leo Wilson. For those of you who don't understand this issue as much, let me explain it. The State Board of Education determines the textbook standards. Now, the reason that is important is that the standards that we set for textbooks are going to be the textbooks that not only get used in Texas public schools, but they will be the textbooks that are likely used in every red state in America. Because textbook publishers cannot afford to make 50 different textbooks for 50 different states. So what happens is California sets their textbook standards, and Texas sets its textbook standards, and they make a book that matches our different standards. And then basically Missouri or Louisiana or Mississippi, they get to pick between California's textbooks and Texas's textbooks. Our standards are not just important for our state. Our standards are important for almost every public school in every red state in America. The difference, though, over the years is that textbooks started to become less of what was used to actually determine what students would learn. When I was going through school, I had a textbook, and that was tons of my actual study material was out of that textbook. And that's not true today. And one of the ways that leftists have ignored the more conservative standards that we often set is that all of the woke leftist agenda items are found in the instructional materials, not the textbooks. There might be a reference to this little thing that's in this textbook and this page, read this story and write this report, but the instructional materials can have a tremendous amount of woke leftist ideology. So one of the things that HB 100 did was it centralized authority over instructional materials content decisions at the state level, giving the State Board of Education broad power to determine which resources are deemed unacceptable for use in classrooms. And this bill took effect this fall. So we made sure that it was clear that if there's instructional materials that are out of lockstep with Texas values and the standards set by the State Board of Education, we can deem them unacceptable and you cannot use them in your classrooms. Again, going back to the fact that who serves on this board ends up being really, really, really important. So they set the standards for the textbooks and now the instructional materials because of HB 100, which was passed by Terry Leo Wilson, the Senate, and the governor signed it. I'm very grateful. We talked about some of the wins we had. I don't even think that bill was one I mentioned on my wins episode of the legislative session, but Grassroots often undercount some of the accomplishments that we all put in a lot of effort to make. And HB 100 is one of those substantial accomplishments. It makes sure that it is harder. It makes it harder for the leftist teachers to bring their filth into their own classrooms. Then they're going to manage the money of the permanent school fund. So they set the textbook standards, manage the permanent school fund. The textbooks they basically create the standards for end up being used in almost every public school classroom in every red state in America. And then they approve charter schools. And here's the reality. We do not have a majority of the State Board of Education that currently actually believes that parents should have more options when it comes to charter schools. It's very, very hard to get a charter school approved to get to 8 votes. You might start on any given day with 5 or 6 votes that you can count on, but the rest won't show up. Here's the crazy thing. If the State Board of Education approved a charter school to get built in an area, and it really wasn't necessary, then nobody's going to come to that charter. No one's going to use it. Nobody's forced to enroll in a charter school. The parents have to actively decide that whatever my other schooling option is, this is better. They have to voluntarily go there and try to enroll their kid. And most of our charter schools have waiting lists. They have people trying to get in that can't get in. But we currently have a State Board of Education that honestly spends a pretty significant amount of its time opposing more charter schools being opened. Most charter expansion in Texas over the years has happened with existing charters that keep growing their campuses because you don't need another vote by the State Board of Education to do that. And that's really unfortunate. There are going to be a number of elections this cycle for the State Board of Education that are going to be very, very important. Evelyn Brooks, who is by far the most liberal member of the 10 Republicans on the State Board of Education, I believe is not running for re-election. And we already have Mindy Bumgarner. Her husband is Ben Bumgarner, who serves in the Texas House, and she is running. She would be a significant, substantial upgrade from Evelyn. You also have a lot of speculation that Kevin Ellis and Will Hickman also may not be running for re-election. We will probably see some of these announcements in the coming weeks or months. I don't know when people will make final decisions, but there are going to be great opportunities to make sure that we get a number of conservative Republicans elected. Now, if you are in one of these districts, first of all, I need you to look up who your State Board of Education member is. And if they are a conservative, then you need to just reach out to them and thank them for being a consistent conservative on the State Board of Education and make sure they get reelected. If they are not one of the consistent conservative Republicans, you need to reach out and ask to meet with them and talk to them and ask them why we don't have 8 votes that consistently vote with parents against woke ideology in our classrooms, and to make sure our permanent school fund is managed in not only a conservative manner, but in a manner that defangs the left. So you should have those conversations with your member of the State Board. There are going to be elections for State Board of Education. They're elected in waves, so not everyone is up every cycle because they're 4-year terms. So only half the board's up one cycle and half the board's up the next cycle. But look up your district and see where they're at. If you need more information about your district, reach out to me. Go to lukemacias.com, go to the contact form, fill that out. It'll come directly to my email, and I can reply, and we can have a conversation about your particular State Board of Education seat. People have to be more engaged with this board. There's one of the conservatives that ran this, or is consistent this time, is a guy named Brandon Hall. And Brandon Hall ran 2 years ago against Pat Hardy. Pat Hardy was on the board back when I was running campaigns in 2009 and 2010. She was on the board at that time. And on some issues, she was a consistent Republican, and on some issues, she wasn't. And Brandon Hall ran and had a significant amount of grassroots conservative support and was able to defeat Pat Hardy and actually give conservatives even the 5 consistent votes we have today. So we fell behind. And it's because Republicans and conservatives stopped paying attention to the state board and focused on a lot of other really important battles at hand. So the reason I wanted to do this episode real quick is because I just wanted to reorient conservatives in Texas around the importance of the State Board of Education, remind us what all they do and why it has a pretty big impact on the direction of our state, and make sure that we as a whole are saying who is on that board matters, and we're going to be really deeply engaged in the battles to come. That's really what I wanted to do. I ran a number of campaigns early in my career in this area. There's not a lot of political consultants that engage in State Board of Education races because there's not a lot of money to make in them. They're really big areas and you don't have big budgets, but they're really, really important. So I hope that you all pay attention to that and understand the significance of engaging with that elected body statewide.
Are you worried about your kid's future? You should be. I'm Charles Blaine with Texas Tomorrow. This is a show where we're going to talk about the issues and the people that are pushing the policies that concern your family, your home, and your kids. Catch Texas Tomorrow every Thursday.
In closing, one of the court cases that has gotten a lot of attention in Texas is Robert Roberson, who is on death row and is scheduled to be executed in mid-October. Robert Roberson is the gentleman who murdered his daughter, and the justice system has found him guilty of that multiple times. We do not accuse somebody of doing these things when it is alleged. That's one of the cool things about the rule of law that we have. We say this person allegedly did this, but all of this evidence was reviewed by a jury of his peers, was acted upon. He was found guilty and given the death penalty. And then at this point, with all of the drama of the Innocence Project and George Soros and the left, his case is probably been put before almost the entire judiciary. I mean, if you're a judge in Texas, likely you got some filing at some point about Robert Roberson, and every one of those judges every time has reviewed material and said Robert Roberson is guilty and his daughter deserves justice. Now, in what should be a final blow to Robert Roberson, the Dallas Morning News, and the Dallas Morning News had literally published story after story after story that largely was this innocent project propaganda. And they finally carried a story from 3 pediatric doctors, child abuse pediatricians. And I'm just going to read this story to y'all real quick. Child abuse pediatricians, Robert Roberson's daughter died of abusive head trauma. And this runs counter to what Roberson's attorneys, who are funded by the left, have been saying the entire time. They said it was shaken baby syndrome, and we don't know, and this man did not kill his daughter. This is the op-ed from these 3 pediatric doctors. We are pediatricians with expertise in child abuse, each with decades of experience providing medical care for children. After the murder conviction and planned execution of Robert Roberson became a widely covered matter, we became interested in understanding what happened to his daughter, Nikki Curtis, that led to her death. After digging deeply into the facts of the case, including reviewing the records presented to the courts and her autopsy report, we are convinced that Nikki was the victim of child abuse. Robert Roberson has been on death row for over 20 years, convicted of murder. Texas intends to execute him next month. We're not advocating for Roberson's execution and believe that his sentence should be commuted to life in prison. Clearly, these 3 pediatric doctors are not supporters of the death penalty. They don't believe that that is just, as Scripture says, but that's what they say. Hey, we are saying he is guilty, but we're not necessarily advocating for the death penalty. We are concerned, however, and this is where I think it's important. This is from these doctors. We are concerned, however, that the effort to spare him from execution has led to the spread of false conclusions about the nature of Nikki's death. His attorneys and supporters argue for clemency by claiming that he is innocent and that there was no crime. These claims are not only wrong, but dangerous. This piece focuses on the facts about what happened to Nikki and illustrates the danger of the flawed theories put forth regarding her death. Further, this case illustrates how common defense arguments undermine efforts to understand abuse and keep kids safe. 2-year-old Nikki arrived at the hospital blue, limp, and unresponsive. I should have given y'all a precursor to say that you don't listen to this with your kids, but I'll continue reading here. And unresponsive with fixed and dilated pupils, she never regained consciousness and was soon pronounced dead. While her father reported that Nikki was behaving normally before falling from the bed, they were sharing and later becoming unresponsive. Nikki's medical evaluation and autopsy tell a different story. They reveal clear evidence of blunt force head trauma. She had generalized brain swelling, extensive bleeding over the surface of her brain, multiple body impact sites under her scalp, bleeding in her eyes, bruises on her face and the back of her head, bruising on her shoulder, and bleeding into the muscles of her back and neck under her shoulder. Her medical evaluation and autopsy clearly indicate a violent and traumatic death. The conviction of Mr. Roberson was consistent with the tragic facts that led to Nikki's untimely demise. Roberson supporters claim a very different account of what happened to Nikki. They have ignored and denied many of Nikki's medical findings. They have misinterpreted others. They claim that Nikki died of an undiagnosed pneumonia, a toxic level of medication, and/or a fall from the bed. They also contend that Roberson was wrongly convicted for Nikki's death because of a medical diagnosis of shaking. Shaking is not a diagnosis. Rather, it is a mechanism that can cause abuse and head trauma. The medical term for inflicted head injury, shaking and impact, are the most common mechanisms of AHT. Roberson supporters say the shaking has been discredited as a cause, even though perpetrator confessions, eyewitness accounts, and even animal studies provide solid evidence that shaking can cause AHT. They say that there are alternative explanations for the finding of AHT, even though through thorough medical history physical examination, and appropriate laboratory tests and imaging in most cases distinguish AHT from accidental trauma and medical diagnosis. They claim that Nikki died from causes other than trauma, but pneumonia, a toxic drug level, and a 2-foot fall can account. That Nikki died, from causes other than trauma, but pneumonia, a toxic drug level, and a 2-foot fall cannot account for her multiple impact injuries. These supporters willfully ignore clear medical findings that demonstrate blunt force trauma. They disregard the fact that shaking is not the only mechanism that causes AHT, and they fail to explain Nikki's many traumatic injuries. Their emphasis on shaking is an attempt of misdirection. While Nikki may have been shaken, there's no doubt she suffered multiple impact injuries. The facts show that she died because of trauma. Now, I could continue to read on, but why have I gone through that description? And there is more to read, but I'm going to stop there and just tell you that over the next couple weeks, I anticipate that there are going to be many misdirected individuals that start talking and clamoring about this case. And one of the unfortunate things that happens is that they misdirect and try to shift the conversation to some other part of the process and give you one little bit of information out of context, right? Maybe a kernel of truth, but out of context, to say, unless you individually are completely certain of everything that completely exists, unless all of us together are completely certain of every single fact that's out there, then for Robert Roberson to be executed would be unjust. And that is in no way what our system believes, and it's not what you should believe either. See, you're not a judge, and you're not a jury. And one of the reasons we have judges and juries is because there are specific people that are vocationally called either for a long time or in a jury situation for a very short period of time to sit down and listen to a mountain of evidence and hear both sides present all of these facts and then come together and say what happened and what should be the legal remedy. What occurred? Did a crime occur? And if a crime did occur, what should be the penalty? And then when they give the harshest and strongest penalty that we see, not only in the United States of America, but also in the pages of Scripture, there is then a full process by which you can go to the judicial system and to our governor and ask for an introduction of new information and perspective and data that wasn't known to potentially try to stop an execution. All of those remedies have been tried, and all have fallen short. And the advocates against the death penalty this time have gone to great lengths, even to the point of individually reaching out to judges, which it's literally illegal for them to do. They have individually reached out to judges and tried to sway them on this case. They've crossed every ethical line that protects our justice system in the pursuit of what they would call justice. And they have ignored many of the facts that were laid out here in the Dallas Morning News. It is a tragic thing when a child is violently murdered in our state. And this happened a very long time ago. I was 12 years old when Nikki's life was taken by her father. 12. I'm 35 years old today. For the next 2 weeks, if you're an inside Texas political person, you're going to see a lot put out on this case. And I just wanted to warn you and also provide you with important facts that matter as you view the discussions of the next coming weeks. May God bless you, and may God bless Texas.